My name is Phil Bissell. I was born on August the 6th, 1919 in Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh. I didn't live in Pennsylvania very long. I think I was 6 months old when the folks moved to Connecticut. You remember, I'm sure, I certainly do, the Depression of the 30s. And that's sort of a nightmare, going to school on split sessions, and then the morning or the afternoon, whichever you were on, you went out and worked and brought the money home, and what there was of it. And then I worked for another year after I graduated from high school. I worked for a year full time. But everybody had to work. Everybody had to pitch in and put the money in the pot when they got home at the end of the week. I heard through our church, our priest back there had lived in Colorado, gone to Colorado College, and then gone to divinity school back at Yale. And thanks to him, I'm in Colorado. He got me interested and got me a half-tuition scholarship, and the rest was up to me as far as eating and place to live. And my wife and I worked in mealtime at the ladies' dorm at Colorado College, and she was a waitress and I was a busboy, and we were just starting to work. It was about 11:30 Sunday morning, and that's where we heard about it, and that was in 41, and I was fortunate enough to complete my school. I was a senior, and we were both seniors at that time. I and two of my friends went down to the post office after graduation and enlisted, and we were going to go through the whole war together. Well, we got to the reception center, and first thing they did was send one to the medical corps, one to the engineers, and one to artillery. We didn't see each other until after the war. In Christmas vacation, my senior year, that would have been Christmas of 41, a bunch of us came up to Denver and went to all the enlistment offices, and I tried to get into the Marines and the Navy and the Air Force and the Army to see if I could go to an officer candidate school or something, and I was turned down because I'm colorblind. Well, after I went to basic training in Texas, or during that time, I applied again for OCS and was turned down because of color blindness. So I don't know how I did it. Probably a little initiative on my part. I got to have an interview with a captain that was on this board that was approving applications. And he said, well, I'll give you one more chance. He said, we have another test. It's a yarn, little balls of yarn. The first test they gave you is what they called an Ishihara test. It was a Japanese test, actually, determined whether you were colorblind. Different colored dots, and you were supposed to see a certain image. Well, it didn't work. Well, anyway, to make a long story short, I passed the yarn test, and I got my grays and greens mixed up. And I guess they overlooked it because they accepted me. I don't know whether you'd call it initiative or just stubbornness or what, that I said, no, I'm going to keep trying, and I finally got in. I went to Camp Wallace, Texas, between Galveston and Houston, and you know what it's like there in June, July, and August. So I got out of there in September and went to North Carolina, where I went to OCS and was commissioned in December of 42. Called Gibby on the phone and asked her if she could come up to Connecticut. That was where I was living. I mean, that was my home base, although I hadn't spent much time there in the last 4 years. I'd spent most of my time in Colorado. And made arrangements that she could come back and meet the folks, and which she did, and she was with us about 4 or 5 days. I had to get back to camp, and that's where we became engaged in New Haven, Connecticut. And I was in North Carolina until February of 44. in training and training troops and so forth. And that's when I got the word that I was going overseas as a replacement. We went over on the Aquitania, which was a pretty good ship, an old ship. In fact, the troops from World War I had gone overseas on the Aquitania. And on the railings, hand railings, on the decks, a lot of carved their initials or their names with the date 1918 on, still in the hand railings. Got over into landed in Scotland. I got into Wales in March. We had a lot of fun. We had our favorite pub that was about a mile and a half from where we were camped. The pubs took care of us pretty much, and we had a couple of favorite pubs in Wales and again in North Devon. And we shipped out from North Devon. And I learned how to play darts and got into a contest and the whole bit. So, and we had some good English friends. And it's a great country, England, and I think. And we went over to France around the 1st of September of '44. And from there we wandered through France, Belgium, and Holland, and Germany. I wasn't involved too much in frontline duty, so we were support troops. My branch of service was anti-aircraft, self-propelled. But when I got over to Europe as a replacement, they were starting a replacement system to handle replacements at the front, and also what they call casuals. In other words, fellows that had been to the front had gone back maybe to the hospital or for injuries, but they were on their way back to the units, and we handled these troops. We were attached to 16th Corps in the 9th Army, and we followed right along with them. And what we did is get uniforms and equipment and all that sort of thing for the troops that were going either back or up for the first time. When I got to England as a replacement, and they were starting these replacement camps to take care of after D-Day when they needed replacements. That's when they were taking a lot of these replacement officers that were coming over, not only replacement officers but enlisted men too, and formed these replacement battalions and depots. Replacement company. I was captain in a replacement company. Well, France isn't my favorite place. It was nice, but the people are different from anything I ever ran into in Europe anyway. They were all right. I made some good friends in France. In fact, after we got back, after the war was over, and we went back to France to wait to go to to the Pacific or to the Far East or whatever. We met some very nice people, and so I can't condemn all the French, I guess, but they had an attitude, and I can't blame them. After all, they had the Germans in their backyard for 2 or 3 years, and they weren't treated very nicely. So I don't think they particularly appreciated the Americans. I really don't. But that's all right. When we were in France, a little town just before we moved to Belgium, we were about 10 miles from Fontainebleau, and the colonel thought we needed more exercise, so he paraded us all down to 10 miles down to Fontainebleau, and some of those poor guys, they were in terrible shape. But they made it down and back, and we got to tour the Josephine lived there. But anyway, when I got back that night, hiking back, and just before retreat, we lined up, and the colonel came out. And he says, "Lieutenant Bissell, you've been promoted to captain." That was on the 15th of October of '44. The day that I got my notice that I was going overseas, Gibby had gone to the doctor and found out that she was pregnant, and so young Phil Jr., who is not very young anymore, was born in August of '44, And he was about 16 months old when I got home. We were busy enough so that we didn't sit around and brood, you know. But yes, I thought of him a lot, and of course Gibby sent me photos and kept me in touch with him as he matured to 18 months or 16 months. You always had time to sit down and write a letter. Well, it took 10 minutes or so. I tried to do it as frequently as I could. I can't tell you right off how frequent it was, but I know it was at least once a week and maybe 2 or 3 times a week. I was kept informed, and she got my mail real quick, and of course you couldn't tell her much as far as where you were. That was a no-no, and but you tried to hint between the lines approximately where you were, and then of course we had to censor all the enlisted mail, and we didn't censor every letter. But as far as the guys were concerned, they couldn't take the chance that it was, although there was no punishment. If we found something, we'd just black it out. But very rarely did you run into anything like that. And one of the things that Gibby did, she said, well, you must need cigarettes. So she'd send me these cigarettes. Well, of course, where we were, the Army gave you cigarettes. If you were in what they called a combat zone, the cigarettes were free, so we got a carton every week. Well, that was more than I could handle, really. And then, of course, Gibby's cigarettes kept coming. We even had a liquor ration, but I can't remember. I really can't remember getting that in Europe. I don't remember that at all. But while we were in England, before we crossed over, we got a liquor ration every month. And I can't remember whether we paid for that. I think we paid for that, but you were allowed so much. And of course, we didn't have an awful lot of time to drink. We were in Belgium for about a month and a half. We were there when the Germans attacked at the Bulge, and the way we were initiated to that was through, we were quartered in an area close to an Air Force base in Belgium. And of course what the Germans tried to do was knock that base out. So we woke up about 2 in the morning with bombs dropping around, and we thought, well, something's happening. Well, as it turned out, I can't remember when that was. I think it was around the 16th or 17th of December. And we were moved out of there real quick. Went to a little farming town in Belgium. And we were there, well, the Bulge was over, as I recall. And as far as the Germans were concerned, I think it was around the 26th or 27th of December. In other words, we were there during Christmas. And then we moved from spot to spot around and in Belgium, and then finally moved to Holland. Of course, all those little countries are so close together, it's not much of a trip. That's when we decided we're going to move forward, but not too far forward. We couldn't get too far forward because the Germans were still coming. And thanks to Bastogne, that small group of guys saved the day. It was probably in March sometime. I think it was in March. And then when we got to Germany, why, we kept moving all the time because they were moving and we were following. And that's when I took my 3-day pass to Brussels, and because we knew it was about over. France, of course, the Germans spared Paris pretty much, and Belgium had some pretty bad destruction, and as did Holland. And of course, when we got to Germany, we took care of that. They really had some destruction. After the war ended, we had this no fraternization thing going in Germany, which people didn't pay too much attention to. They threatened you. I mean, your superiors threatened you with punishment, but I don't know of anybody that was punished for fraternizing. We had some 75 millimeter shells, or we didn't, the Germans did, that they'd picked up. And there was an artist in this little town in Germany, what was the name of it? Zweckel, I think. And they took these shells and hammered them into areas where we had served and things that we had done. And Gibby wanted to throw it away, and I wouldn't let her. So, and I'm glad I kept it. It's really interesting. It names a couple of the outfits we were with and places we'd been. And one night in Germany, and this was shortly before the war ended, we sat up and played poker all night. All night. I mean, we started playing about 7 o'clock in the evening, and it was Easter Eve too, as a matter of fact. So the Sunday, it was a Saturday night, and Sunday, of course, was Easter. And I must have lost or won at least 75 cents or a dollar. I don't know. I was in Brussels. I got my first time off in over a year, and we knew that the war was about over, and so I was granted a 3-day pass to Brussels, and that's where I was when the Germans quit. So we had quite a celebration in Brussels, but unfortunately I had to get on a truck and go back to camp in Germany. Went to a movie that night. Not a GI theater, but a Belgian theater. And the lights came up after the movie was over, and I looked next door, and here was a guy, Art Servy, from Denver, who went to CC, was sitting right next to me. I looked at him and I said, "Are you Art Servy?" And he says, "Yeah." Oh, that was, and that's, you hear that a lot. I've heard it from several guys that were over there that just by chance had run into somebody they knew 15 years ago or 5 years ago or whatever. We've bounced back and forth in a lot of little towns in Germany, and finally went to Camp New Orleans. They called it Camp New Orleans. It was in France, where we prepared to go to the Pacific. And we'd shipped all our equipment and everything down to Marseille. And it was already on shipboard. We were about ready to head for the Pacific when they dropped the bomb on my birthday. That was the best birthday present I ever had. When we decided that the Japs were no longer potent, why, we moved back to Belgium. And from I can't even, Namur, N-A-M-U-R, Namur, Belgium. Then from there we went to Antwerp and waited for space on a ship. It's pretty tough waiting to go home, and cold. And we were living in tents, and it's bitter cold, and all you had was a little pot-belly stove and a tent that held about 20 people, and it didn't, but that was nothing. It didn't bother us much. We knew we were going home. We left Antwerp on the, oh gosh, must have been around the 22nd or 23rd of December. And then we came home on a victory ship, what they call a victory ship, which is a little bit bigger than a Liberty ship. And we got into one of those North Atlantic storms like they have in early December. And sea never bothered me, and I never got sick either way, but I did get scared. More so coming home on that little ship in this storm in the Atlantic than going over when there were submarines all around you. But it was the darndest storm I ever saw. I thought sure a couple of times, we were going to go over, but never did. But we went over far enough that a big swell or wave went down the funnel and into the galley on the ship and put all the fires out. but we survived. We got into New York on the 1st of December in the New York Harbor. And of course, they had all these telephone booths lined. Everybody was lined up to call home. We had a great CO, Lieutenant Colonel Haynes, who has since passed away. He lived, when he got out, he went to move to Utah, and he was from Washington, D.C. area. And moving to Utah, you know, that's quite a change. I went over and visited him a couple of times, almost went to work for him. He was a great guy and a great morale builder, and treated all these people like human beings. He stayed in the reserves. I think probably, I think he made Brigadier General before he finally resigned or retired. And I stayed in the reserves about a year, but I should have stayed in. I could have had a little more income from the federal government, but after a year or two in the reserves, I couldn't see that we were really accomplishing anything in our particular unit. And I know the reserves have done a tremendous job for our country. And those who stayed in and were called back in, Korea and Vietnam, and they made some great sacrifices. Had I stayed in the reserves, I probably would have gone back to, probably gone to Korea. I don't know, but I never dwelled upon it, and I was glad to get home. Glad to get home. And she came back, and she was in Denver with her mother until I got home, and then we stayed there for a while until we found out for sure what we wanted to do, and that's when I had the opportunity to go back to Colorado Springs. We had a lot of friends down there. We had a lot of friends in Denver because there were so many people from Denver, especially South and East High, that had gone to college down at Colorado College in the Springs. And so it was nice to get home. I graduated. I didn't take advantage of going back to school, but I took advantage of it in that they supplemented our salaries at that time with our company. The company and the government had some sort of an agreement, because the companies really were taking on a bunch of guys that had never really made a living, and other than that's another thing, my $21 a month, the first month I was in the service. Right after that, we got a big promotion, got $50 a month. We managed, I forget what the government contributed. I don't know whether it was a 50-50 deal or a 35-65 or what it was, but I'm glad we had it, because the salary that we started off with was pretty bad. As a captain, I was rich. I was getting $300 a month, you know, and they weren't paying those kinds of wages in private enterprise right out of the Army. The company that I worked for told me there were 2 sales territories available. One was in Wyoming, one was in Colorado Springs. So guess which one I took? The Thompson Pipe and Steel Company is now a Northwest Pipe Company. They were bought out here 2 or 3 years ago. And it's still a good company, probably a better company than when I retired, because they brought in some good personnel and changed some of their practices. And I traveled, my first sales job was Southern Colorado. I traveled all of Southern Colorado. And then when I came to Denver, I traveled, I traveled Northern Colorado, and then they tacked on Northern Texas and Oklahoma and Kansas and parts of Missouri and Nebraska. And then eventually I was put in the office, which was all right, except I enjoyed the traveling. It didn't bother me at all. It bothered me if I had to be out over a week at a time, but and that happened occasionally, but it wasn't bad. I was involved in a trade association or through my company, and I fortunately, they had nice annual meetings in nice places like Florida and Hawaii and California, and so of course we flew to those, and then we had a meeting once a month, the board meeting. I was on the board of the association, and that usually met in Chicago once a month. So, but I'd fly on special occasions if I had a special job I was working on in, say, Kansas City or Oklahoma City or Omaha or something. Of course, I'd fly, and because I was going to be there for 2 or 3 days and then fly home. But otherwise, I did a lot of driving. I put on 50, 60,000 miles a year. I've lived in Broomfield since 1965, a little town of 5,000, 5,500 people. And of course, the original people that came here, other than the farmers, they were here long before the newcomers came in 55 and 56. I don't think anybody that's lived here for a long time, other than the city fathers, are real thrilled with it. I liked it when it was 5,000 people, and in fact, when we moved here, we were over by the golf course. Why, we weren't even in the city then. We were still in Boulder County. Well, Boulder County. We're in Boulder County now, but we had no connection with the city except we used their water and their sewage and plant and that type of thing. It's inevitable that what's happened, it's happening everywhere. It's just not Broomfield, and I don't think there's much we can do about it as long as the people still reproduce and move here, and there are so many people that move here to Broomfield or to Colorado because it is Colorado, and it's the best state in the Union. I voted for it. I'm looking forward to it. I just hope we don't go into a real bad recession, even though we're starting in a little slight one right now. But if we go into recession, that's going to hurt our sales tax income. And there's only one other place they can go for income, and that's the people that live here, to pay for all this debt that we're in. But we knew this was going to happen. What we didn't know was that, or we weren't sure of, that there would be a recession. Well, of course, it's here, and we just have to hope it doesn't get any worse. My oldest son and daughter graduated from high school in Colorado Springs. We moved here when Charlie, our youngest, was in 9th grade. He finished 9th grade up here, and then graduated from Broomfield High. And he went to Western State, and Phil, my oldest, went to Western State, and Carol went to UNC in Greeley. The youngest lives in Lafayette. My son, youngest son, and he was born in 51. My oldest son was born in 44, and my daughter was born in 47. She lives in Mexico. She works for the American school down there in Puebla. And she's been down, well, she married a Mexican. She met him while she was getting her master's degree at the University of the Americas. She met him, and he's in business down there for himself. And my daughter, she started off teaching, but she's in administration down there now. I hesitate to say anything about the present generation, but and not all of them, obviously, but some of the things that go on that just floor me. I can't fathom it. I've been lucky with my kids. They've all turned out fine. They aren't kids anymore. Well, I don't think any of them have any discipline. And of course, you can't blame all of that on the kids. It may be lack of discipline from home, or it may have been peer pressure. I'm sure probably more peer pressure than anything else, except those that had strong wills to do right. I retired in 81, and Gibby taught school for a while, but she she never retired. She resigned. I told her that she was getting kind of tired of working, and I said, "We'll take a year of absence." And so she took a year of absence. And then the year was up. I asked her, "Well, now, when are you going back?" "Well, I don't think I'll go back." More in church probably than anything else. And right now, my wife and I both put a little time in at fish. I don't know whether you're familiar with fish or not. And I was involved here in Gayton Green. I was served on the board for 8 years, not consecutively, but at 3 different times. And as far as involvement with the city, no, I've never been involved with the political end of it. I've seen them both at reunions at school. One is living in New Orleans, or just outside of New Orleans. He went with an oil company. And the fellow that went into the engineers, he they both went. I guess they both were with yes, they both went with oil companies. Dick was a geology major, and the other fellow was Tom McCann, was a basic engineering degree. We had our fun, we had our hard times, and we had our laughs. I would like to have gone back to England, and I have no really good excuse. I could have dug up the money somewhere, I'm sure of that, but we never did it.